So as I was saying, this week in Meretz Hashem, we're going to continue in Kapitel Aleph. So as we've already started in this kapitel, so we focus really on the idea of Ashrei, and specifically, again, what it means to lead an Ashrei life and how one is really able to lead an Ashrei life. How, at the end of the day, can I create for myself an Ashrei life? So again, just to kind of retrace our steps, in the first couple of Shiurim, we focused on the avoidance of negative things, right? We focused on the idea that a person has to try to avoid certain pitfalls. That was Pasuk Aleph. In Pasuk Beis, then our last couple of Shiurim, we focused a bit more on the concept of actively engaging in positive dynamic activity, right? That it's not just enough to avoid the pitfalls, it's not just enough to avoid the evil, but one has to actively engage in positive dynamic activity as well. What I want to draw your attention to for today's shir is Pasuk Gimel. So let's take a look together in source number 1. The Pasuk says, V'haya ke'etz shasul al palgei mayim, asher piryo yitain bi'ito, va'aleu lo yibol, v'chol asher ya'aseh yatzliach. So Pasuk Gimel simply reads, he shall be as a planted tree beside rivulets of water, which brings forth its fruits in its season, and its leaves do not wilt, and whatever he does prospers. So what I'd like to do with this particular pasuk is actually divide it up really into 3 distinct parts. There is going to be V'haya ke'etz shasul al palgei mayim. He'll be as a tree planted besides rivulets of waters. That's part 1. Asher piro yitain bi'ito. That's ultimately, again, part 2, really 4 parts. That's part 2. Va'aleu lo yibol. His leaf will not wither. That's part 3. V'chol asher ya'aseh yatzliach. And everything he does is successful. That's part 4. So for today's shir, I want to just focus really on this first phrase. V'haya ke'etz shasul al palgei mayim. And he will be like a tree planted beside rivulets. Rivulets means like multiple streams of water. What is it that David HaMelech is trying to portray? And ultimately, again, how does it fit in with the theme of the kapitel as we've established it? So let's begin with number 2. So the Radak says something truly beautiful. The Radak writes, V'haya ke'etz shasul al palgei mayim. See, he writes, Dima ha'adam hatov le'etz shasul al palgei mayim. David HaMelech is comparing a good person. Now remember again, we're defining the good person as the Ashrei Ish, right? The praiseworthy individual who has followed the Davidic wisdom so far. He has not, right, again, avoided all of the pitfalls, engaged in a positive dynamic activity, and such a person will be like a tree planted by streams of water. Writes to Radak, Ha'adam sheyasra meira v'yasetov. So a person who avoids evil, avoids the pitfalls of life, that's Pasuk Aleph, and then engages in positive dynamic activity, that's Pasuk Beis. Hinehu ke'etz shasul al palgei mayim shehu savea liolam. Such a person will be like a tree planted by streams of water. A tree like that is always content. Now what does that mean? You see, what's the imagery? The imagery of a tree planted by multiple streams of water is as follows. Normally a tree may have only one source of nourishment, one source of moisture. A tree that is planted al palgei, multiple streams, means it never has to fear running out of water. Because even if one stream dries up, there are still other forms of nourishment, other forms of sustenance that the tree has the ability to access. That's the imagery. So says Radak, what David HaMelech is saying is as follows, that a person who lives an Ashrei life as defined by avoiding the pitfalls, 1. Number 2, actively engaging in dynamic, productive good, will be like a content tree. A tree that is well nourished. He goes on, he says, Husavea liolam. That tree is sated forever. Satisfied. Kain hu yismach liolam bechalko. Therefore, such a person who leads an Ashrei life will be forever happy with his lot. Im ma'at, im harbe. Whether he has a little, whether he has a lot, he ultimately, again, will be satisfied with his lot. So what is Radak saying? This is incredible. So let's work backwards. The imagery, as we said before, of a eitz shasul al palgei mayim, a tree that is situated by rivulets of water, that imagery is that tree is totally content. Why is that tree content? Because that tree has everything that it needs and then some, right? That tree has nourishment, but not just one form of nourishment, 1, 2, 3, however many streams are nourishing that tree is content. So says the Radak something absolutely amazing. At the end of the day, what are we all searching for in life? What are we all searching for? You see, people think you're looking for happiness. Not really. We're not really looking for happiness. What are we really looking for? Contentment. I just want to be content. Now, of course, one can make the argument that contentment creates happiness. When you are content, you are happy. You know, on a basic physical level, a person has a meal and they feel satisfied, you feel content. And the natural emotional disposition of a person who is content is happy. You see, contentment is more like a state of being. Happiness is more the emotional reaction to that. So says the Radak something absolutely amazing. We're all looking for contentment in life. I want to be content, and therefore by extension, happy. But yet, why does that feel so elusive? Why is that so difficult to find that contentment, to find that happiness in life? And ultimately, says Radak, it's because we're often looking in all the wrong places. That at the end of the day, I think different things in life. So again, ask 5 people, what will allow you to feel content in life? And you'll get a variety of answers. By the way, all good answers. So if you ask a person often who's not yet married, they'll say, oh, once I find my bashert, then I'm going to be content. And ask a couple who is married but doesn't yet have children, what's going to make you content? Once I have a mishpach, I'll be content. And someone who's married and has children, what's going to make you content? You know, once I have a parnasa. I don't need to be rich, I don't need to be wealthy, but once I have financial security, I'm going to be content. And ask the person who has financial security, when are they going to be content? You know, all I need is a nice vacation. Once I have a vacation, a nice vacation, I'll be content. And as person has a vacation, an apartment in Eretz Yisrael. Once I have an apartment in Eretz Yisrael, so again, I'm not moving to Israel because I'm way too comfortable and happy here, but an apartment does 2 things. Number 1, it eases my guilt because at least I have real estate there. And number 2, it's my insurance policy in case the gullus doesn't work out. And also, Baruch Hashem, I could go ahead and then I'll be content. And you know how this works. It goes on, and once you have the apartment, all it just needs is to be furnished. Just furnished, and not sparsely furnished, meaning this has got to be like Waldorf furnished, you know, and then I'll be content. And the list goes on and on and on, which is why most of us end up living life without a real sense of contentment. Why, says the Radak? Because there's only one source of real contentment in this world. That source of contentment is leading an Ashrei life. This is such a profound idea. David HaMelech is telling us in the beginning, this is, you know, I have to say, I've had the privilege, because of wit, to be able to teach Tehillim for years. Not that we've gotten so far in Sefer Tehillim, but Baruch Hashem, and it's amazing how now, only thanks to all of you, that I had to go back to the drawing board, go back to Kapitel Aleph, that I found the most incredible lesson from David HaMelech, and it's in the opening Kapitel. If you want an Ashrei life is a life of contentment. But the only way to have contentment in life is to follow this plan, is to avoid ultimately, again, the negative pitfalls, to engage in active, meaningful things, or stated a little bit more kind of like panoramically, is to lead a life of meaning. It is only if I lead a life of meaning, a life that is steeped in holiness, a life that is steeped in Kedusha, a life that is steeped in accomplishment, that's when I find contentment. And when I find contentment, then ultimately, again, remember, another word for contentment is this inner peace. You know, so many of us feel like this constant, like, churning inside. So at first, because we're Jews, we assume it's indigestion. Right? And then, you know, maybe for some who are a bit more, you know, sensitive, I'm having a heart attack. It's not indigestion. It's not a heart attack. It's a lack of inner peace. It's a lack of inner peace. And so many of us suffer from it. And in fact, you know, when you're lacking inner peace, it manifests itself in so many different ways. It causes you to look negatively upon life, to look negatively upon others, to act out in inappropriate ways, to say inappropriate things. People who have inner peace are well-behaved people. People who have inner peace are happy people. People who have inner peace are productive people. Whenever you see in life people who are acting out, and this is true whether it's children or whether it's big children that we call adults, right? And whenever you find people who are acting out, sometimes it happens, somebody does something, you're like, wow, why did that person say that? Or why did that person do that? And sometimes we get angry at the person who acted out. Don't get angry. You have to have rahmanis, you have to feel bad. Because when people behave badly, essentially what they're really broadcasting is, I lack inner peace. Because people with inner peace are b'shalom, people with inner peace are shalem, are whole, people with inner peace are happy. I don't mean people with inner peace have everything in life going their way. That's not necessarily the case at all. But they have a sense of inner peace because they know their life is meaningful. They know their life is meaningful because their life is steeped in kedusha, in holiness, in relationship with Hashem. They know their life is meaningful because it's an ashrei life. An ashrei life that is marked by these two components: avoidance of pitfalls. We all have our pitfalls. We all have our weaknesses. We all have our triggers. We all have the things that set us down the wrong path. So step one is avoid those things. And step two is live a life of active accomplishment. Do, grow, better yourself, better the world. You have that, says David HaMelech, V'haya ke'etz shasul al palgei mayim. You will be like a tree that is settled by a stream, and not just one stream, and not just two streams, and not just three streams, but multiple streams. That tree that straddles multiple streams, that tree is the envy of the forest, because every tree has to worry about its stream drying up. But the tree that straddles multiple streams, that tree has it made. Alles git, as they say, right? Everything is perfect. Everything is wonderful. It doesn't have to worry about anything. Well, you have a life, an ashrei life. You are like that tree. And once you have that ashrei life, you will find yourself overwhelmed by an inner sense of contentment, an inner sense of happiness. You will be sameach bechelkecha, happy with what you have, because you've discovered the greatest secret in life. That happiness, contentment, never comes from anything you could purchase or acquire. Again, purchases and acquisitions are wonderful. They could contribute to your comfort. We have to distinguish between comfort and happiness. A nice house can make you comfortable. A nice car can make you comfortable. A nice vacation makes you comfortable. They will not make you happy. Happiness only comes from contentment. And contentment only comes from an ashrei life. Says the Radak, that's the meaning of that tree that straddles multiple streams is the paradigmatic example of physical contentment. You want that level of contentment in life, you want that inner peace, lead the duality of an ashrei life. The Malbim has a different interpretation. And the Malbim actually says something quite beautiful here. The Malbim writes, he says in number 3, so this is actually quite beautiful. The Torah HaKadosh itself already goes ahead and describes a man as a tree. Interestingly enough, this is in Parshas Kiseitei, when the Torah discusses the laws of war. So the Torah says you're not allowed to needlessly destroy fruit trees. And the wording of the Torah is Kia Adam Eitz Asadehu, is the tree a combatant, right? Is the tree a person? But the Svarim use that pasuk as an incredible metaphor as well. Kia Adam Eitz Asadeh, man is very much like a tree, very much like a tree. So the Malbim addresses this. He says, what does this mean? Hashem Yitzido Yishtatev. Now in number 3, paragraph Aleph. Hashem Yitzido Yishtatev B'sugo Elyon Ema Eitz Vatzomeach. Nashkileu ke'etz asher sharashav netuim unushurashav lemala v'nof lemata. So let me just say this outside. So the Radak says man is like a tree, right? Because remember again, the tree has roots. The tree gains nourishment through the roots, and the nourishment does really two things. Number one, it sustains the trunk, but it also allows the tree to put forward fruit. So the tree is very much like a man. I have roots, right? Those roots ultimately, again, nourish my trunk. And then ultimately, again, my goal is to produce fruit. And that fruit, by the way, could take on a variety of different forms. That fruit could be my children. But remember, again, and this is incredibly important, people sometimes think their greatest accomplishments in life are their children. So that's a little bit dangerous. It's a little bit dangerous too. What if a person doesn't have children? So a person doesn't have children, they're unaccomplished. And second of all, every parent knows you have no control over what your child is going to do or become. So when they're in your home, they might be the most wonderful little tatala or mamela, mamish, a paragon of chesed and of tzidkus and of Torah and of yiras shamayim. But there comes a certain point where they're going to grow up, they're going to leave your house, and you are not going to be a nudnik mother who's going to constantly interfere in their lives. They're going to go up, they're going to live their life, and they're probably going to make hopefully some good decisions and probably some very poor ones as well. And a parent can never, and parents make this mistake all of the time, where they think that their success in life is how their children turn out. And you can't do that, because you could do your best. The world is filled with parents who mamish did their best, but children who made different kinds of decisions. And that's not reflective on the parent. And that's not a failure of the parent. That's a decision of the child. So at the end of the day, my worth as a human being can't come from my children. I gain incredible nachas and incredible happiness. My worth as a human being comes from the actual fruits that I produce. Who am I? Who am I? What have I accomplished? What do I do? Yes, if your children turn out great, fantastic. You can't take all the credit for that. You can't, because they have to make their own decisions. You could take some of the credit for that, just like if your children make some bad decisions, you can't take the fault for that also. Is there some fault within a parent whose child makes bad decisions? Maybe. Maybe there was something wrong in the home. Maybe there was something flawed in the chinuch, but sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes at the end of the day, parents do everything right, and children make their own. So I'm just saying, we naturally think that in the tree paradigm, I have my roots, again, I have my trunk, that's me, and the fruit are my offspring, the fruit of my children. And that, it may be, on some level, maybe some of the fruit, but those are not the ikar fruit you produce in life. The ikar fruit you produce in life is you, because the only fruit that you really control in this world is the fruit of you, the personalistic fruit of the identity you create, the person you become, the life you lead, the accomplishments you accrue. But the Malbim makes a startling observation. He says, man must live life as an inverted tree, an upside down tree. Why? Because remember, my roots are not in the earth. My roots are in Shamayim. My roots are with the Ribono Shel Olam. That's where my sustenance comes from. That's where my energy comes from. That's where my koach comes from. That's where the most important part of me, my neshama, comes from. Because the problem is, if my roots are in the earth, that means that my roots are base, my roots are material, my roots are coarse. No, no, no. So says the Malbim something beautiful. The tree metaphor is fantastic. I have roots, I have a trunk, and I produce fruit. But whereas the tree's roots extend into the ground, my roots extend into Shamayim. My roots are with the Ribono. I come from Hashem. I come from Hashem. You know, we often think that the root metaphor are my parents, my grandparents. That's true. But if you want to take my yichus all the way back, do you know where my yichus goes to? You know, people get so caught up in yichus. Every single human being has the same exact yichus, and that is the Ribono Shel Olam. I come from Hashem. My neshama is a spark from the Ribono Shel Olam. So you can put this on resumes. If people want to know about yichus, just put on there Ribono Shel Olam. That's it. I think it's a conversation stopper right there. So my yichus is I come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. My roots in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The koach from my Father above come into my trunk, come into me. That's me. And then my job in life is produce fruit. So the Malbim says David HaMelech's use of the tree metaphor is incredibly profound on a variety of levels. But the most important part of the metaphor, says the Malbim, is to remember that whereas the tree's roots start in the ground and grow up, my roots start in Shamayim and grow down. A most incredible distinction. But then he goes on. He says, if you take a look in paragraph Beis, he says so beautifully, he says, V'yesh hevdel. However, there is a distinction. Now, what he also points out is that David HaMelech says that man is like a tree that grows by the rivulets of water, by the streams. He doesn't say like grass or like a plant. He dafka says a tree. So the Malbim makes an amazing observation. The Malbim says, actually, skip to paragraph Gimel, actually, for just a moment. So, because he kind of restates it. So the Malbim here discusses that there are three incredible aspects of a tree. He says, because ultimately, again, man is like a tree, not like a blade of grass or not like a blossom. Asher rak mino yishmar, v'hu tachliso acharon, v'chein amon b'nei adam. Lo yasu mu'uma lekiyum isham, rak lekiyum minam, ulahaniach yisram la'olalehem. So the Mama makes an amazing observation. What does a blade of grass or a blossom produce? And the answer is nothing. Their goal is to survive, right? Their goal is to survive. The goal of a blade of grass is to survive. That's its goal. Its job is not to reproduce. Its job ultimately, again, is just to go ahead and survive. Same thing with the blossom. But the tree is different. And he says, the truth is, Rambam writes, a lot of people are like this as well, that they kind of treat their existence as survival. As survival. My job is just to survive. He goes on, he says, Kilu, elem tachlus acher, rak kiyumamin. Some people, again, go through life not really feeling any higher calling, or not really feeling any higher responsibility. My job is just to get through the day. That's my job, right? That's my goal. A lot of people have this goal, right? I just want to get through the day. And there are people who don't just have that goal for the day, they have it for the week. Some have it for the month, some have it for the year, and some have it for an entire life. And after 120, they did a successful job of just getting through life. I got through. Did you accomplish? Did you do anything? I got through. I made it. So says the Malbim something amazing. He says, Aval hu doma ke'etz, asher milvad kiyum mino, asher od yonuv b'seva gam isho yiskayim, v'yitain pri kodesh hilulim Torah u'maisim tovim lashars nafsho. A tree produces fruit. Our job is not just to survive, but our job is to create a legacy. Something that ultimately, again, can outlive me. Now, once again, people often assume that your legacy are your children. Now, that's true. There's no question. Rav Sham Shlomo Hirsch writes that the reason why man has such a desire to have children is because what we desire most in life is immortality. That's why I want to be immortal. But immortality, of course, is not within reach. So what's the next thing, right? What's the next thing next to immortality? Is children. Because in Yirtzeh Hashem, my children will outlive me. That's the one wish that every single parent has, right? That my children will they give me immortality. But ultimately, again, as we said before, your children can't be your legacy. Your children are a part of your legacy. Your mishpacha is a part of your legacy. Your legacy has to be your accomplishments. The priest says the Malbim, why am I like a tree? Because unlike the blade of grass, which is very beautiful but doesn't produce, or the blossom that is very beautiful that doesn't produce, at the end of the day, the tree must produce fruit. What are the fruit that I am producing? The goal in life, says the Malbim, is produce a legacy. And isn't this an incredible, incredible idea to think about? And it sounds sometimes a little bit dramatic. But if I were to leave the world today and people were to look at the life that I lived, what's my legacy? What did I leave over? Again, if you leave behind a mishpacha, leave behind children, of course, that's a beautiful thing. You have a chelik in that legacy, but your children aren't you. This is very, very, very important, right? My children are not an extension of me, right? My children are not my ticket to live the dreams I never had the ability to live, to do the things I never had the ability to do. That's not my child's job. My child's job is not to be another carbon copy of me. My children, Yirtzeh Hashem, should self-actualize in the best way possible. So part of a legacy could be the mishpacha that I built. But there's more to that. What's my legacy? What's my legacy? If I leave this world today, what do I leave behind? How have I changed the world? How have I made the world better? How have I made Am Yisrael better? How have I made my community better? Or yes, how have I made my family better? What are my peiros? What are the fruit that I have left behind? That's Aleph, says the Malbim. Number one is the reason why David HaMelech compares us to a fruit is just as the tree has a legacy in that it produces fruit, I must leave behind. And when I say leave behind, I don't mean, people often think of legacy as something that you focus on after you die. The goal is to create a legacy while you're alive, right? Don't wait till you're dead until people see the peiros that you've created. Your peiros should be there. Your peiros, your fruit, should ultimately, again, be visible even when you're alive and well, Baruch Hashem. What is the legacy that you are creating in your life? What are the fruits of your labors? Go to paragraph Dalet. The Malbim then makes another amazing observation. He says, Kiyu domikates. Why else does David Melech compare the Jew ultimately again to the tree? He says, look, he points out over here, shasul v'lo ke'etz natua. Now we're actually going to discuss this in greater depth in source number 4. David HaMelech's choice of the word shasul instead of natua. Now, interestingly enough, the English translations often translate it in the same way. It'll be like a tree that is planted. But the truth is, as we're going to see, the Malbim writes, Ki yesh hevdel bein hanatua v'hanishtal. There's a difference between something that is natua and nishtal. How so? Hanatua hu natua bimkomo, v'hashasal hu atzameach sheneka mimkomo, v'nishtal makom acher lashvichol etakno. So the Malbim says something very interesting, although we'll see others who disagree with this translation. Natua means the original place where you're planted. Natua means the original place, right? Nishtal or shasul means an object that was uprooted from one area and replanted in a different area. So says the Malbim something that means Vaya ke'eish shasul apal gemer. It doesn't simply mean a tree which was planted by water. It means a tree that was originally in a different location and was uprooted and replanted. What's the message? Look what he writes. He says, "V'hine yesh asavim lachim v'ra'ananim, she'efshar l'shasla mimakom l'makom mirov l'chusam, v'im lo yashvich v'lo yiskamu yamim rabim. Aval ha'etz asher ein l'chusa rav kolkach v'ratu v'livnei shemesh, eis yirakenu mimkomo v'yishteleh makom acher." So the beauty of the tree is that a tree could be uprooted and replanted somewhere else. In other words, says the Malbim, the power of the tree metaphor is that a tree teaches us the ability to adapt. That life is all about adapting. That sometimes, and we're going to develop this idea, sometimes ultimately, again, your tree begins life in one place. But then as a result of your own choices or other choices, the tree is uprooted and replanted somewhere else. Learn to adapt. Sometimes my tree is planted not where I thought it would be planted, not where I want it to be planted, not where I plan to be planted, but here is where I am. We must learn the art of adapting to any circumstance and situation which life throws our way. So you see David HaMelech, or you see the Malbim developing this idea that when David HaMelech tells us that we should be like a tree that's planted by rivulets of water, streams of water, there's a message embedded in the tree. Create a legacy, create your peros, adapt. Look at paragraph Hey. Apal Gemayim, this goes back a little bit to the Radak. The Radak writes, Ki ha'etz hanatua b'makom yavesh yidag b'shanas b'tzuras. So remember again, if a tree is not planted by a water source, either by an irrigation source or by a natural water source, the tree will have difficulty producing fruit. See, he goes on, he says, what's the mess? So now David HaMelech says that a person should be like a tree planted by streams of water. What does this mean? And again, the Malbim picks up, like the Radak did as well, that it doesn't just say one stream of water, it says streams, plural, of water. He says, listen to this, Kein hayisharim ba'adas hafilosofim, asher isnagu b'tzedek v'chesed apinimusam sichliim, lo motzu tamid dai sifkam. He says, if a person tries to live life and create a moral or ethical code on their own, so sometimes that moral ethical code comes up wanting. There's no shortage of examples of this, right? The Nazis, Yimach Shemam v'zichram, operated with a moral and ethical code of their own creation. And when you create your own codes of morality and ethics, you could do whatever you want, even murdering 6 million people in the most gruesome and barbaric way, and convincing yourself that what you are doing is correct and good. Says the Malbim. That is why David HaMelech says, at the end of the day, Havaya ke'et shasul apal gemayim, he says something amazing. He says, Ki hasechel ha'enoshi yila miklo ala matara tamid v'yitor b'shah. When people are left to their own devices, and I develop my own ethics, I develop my own morality. Look, unfortunately, you don't have to go back to Nazi Germany. You could even see, obviously in a very different way, what's happening in contemporary society, how there is a downward spiral in morality. Why? Because the moment, and again, this is even in America, a country founded on Judeo-Christian values. The moment you move away from Judeo-Christian values, and at the end of the day, your values are based on however you feel or whatever you want, there is no telling how deep that downward spiral can go. And we see this now. Even the most basic tenets of morality are now subject to change, are now subject to dispute. Why? Because the moment that your morality, the moment that your system of ethics is not rooted in some type of higher power, then it's, as they say, ish kal yashar be'einav yaseh. Anyone could do whatever they want. And suddenly again, everything becomes okay, everything becomes correct, everything becomes justifiable. So the Malbim writes, Lokein hanatua al Torah Hashem pekudav shematzi tamid chukab. So therefore the Malbim writes something so beautiful. He says, this is what it means. Vayah ke'ish asua palgei mayim. What's the mayim? The mayim is Torah. The mayim is Torah. How do you nourish your tree? Nourish your tree with Torah. Nourish your tree with holiness that is embedded in a system. Nourish your soul, ultimately again with the Ribbon Shalom, but not the Ribbon Shalom, how you feel like it, or how you perceive him, or how you like him, or how you want to do it, but in a framework of Torah, in a system of halacha. You know, people often think that halacha is just a series of do's and don'ts, and therefore sometimes people even become resentful of halacha, right? That why halacha has to tell me how to do this, how to do that, how to put on my shoes, how to conduct myself in all areas of life, right? From the most intimate to my business to everything else. Why? So understand, it's not HaKadosh Baruch Hu or Chazal trying to control us. It's just the opposite. It's them trying to give us a framework for morality, for ethics, and for proper living. Because without a framework, the morality train goes off the rails. That's Vayah ke'ech asua palgei mayim. If you want your tree to succeed in life, it has to be planted by rivers of water. And water ultimately, again, says the Malbim, represents Torah. Therefore, in the Malbim's view, we have the tree metaphor really representing three things. Number one, the tree teaches us, create a legacy. Create a legacy. Create fruit. Create fruit. And again, don't rely on your children to be your legacy. Don't rely on your mishpacha to be your legacy, but rather, again, you have to go ahead. And you see this, by the way, great people who accomplish great things in their lives. It's an amazing thing. You know, there's always this interesting dynamic how sometimes the children of great people often do not follow in their parents' footsteps. There's a whole psychology to this. Number one, being the child of a great person creates a lot of pressure. A lot of times children see what it means to lead a public life, and they say to themselves, no, not so interested in that. But the amazing part is, and by the way, the greatest example of this was Moshe Rabbeinu. What do we know about Moshe Rabbeinu's sons? What do we know about them? Nothing. Moshe Rabbeinu's sons disappear into the sands of time. What? They didn't become Rashi Yeshiva, Gedolim, like him, like their father, like this. Whatever they did, I'm sure they were very good men. They went on to lead their own lives. They became private citizens. But the amazing part of Moshe Rabbeinu's life is, you see, had Moshe said, oh, my legacy is my children, then Moshe Rabbeinu would have been in very big trouble. But Moshe Rabbeinu created an individual personalistic legacy. My legacy is me. My legacy is me. My legacy is what I accomplish. My legacy is what I do. My legacy is the identity I create. It's the change that I affect. If I have children who are wonderful, who go on to accomplish great things publicly or personally, fantastic. That's an added dimension of my legacy. But my legacy is me. My legacy is what I create, is what I do, is the accomplishments that I have. And it's incredibly important because whether we realize it or not, sometimes we hide behind our children. In other words, the establishment of a mishpacha is an incredibly beautiful, magnificent thing. But sometimes we think that is the extent of our obligation. That's not the extent of our obligation, because at the end of the day, we have an obligation, a period of a rivya, to have a family, to have a mishpacha, to raise them in the right ways, to give them the right kind of chinuch, and hopefully they go on to accomplish great things. My obligation in life is me. That's my obligation, to create the best version of myself, and that's my legacy. That's lesson 1 from the tree. Lesson 2 from the tree is the tree has the ability to adapt. It could be uprooted from one area, put into a different area. In life, the ability to adapt. And the truth is, what an important lesson, because if there's one thing that we've learned about over the last 8 months, it is the ability to adapt. And we also have learned how crucial it is to have this skill set, because those who can't adapt wither and die. I don't mean literally, but I mean at least metaphorically. But those who can adapt have the ability to thrive in all circumstances. And lastly, nourish your soul in the embedded framework of Torah and Yiddishkeit. Because if you don't embed your spirituality, your holiness, your spiritual nourishment in a system, in a framework, if it's just about what you think is right or what feels good to you or what takes your fancy in that moment, unfortunately, that is a recipe for disaster. Take a look at number 4. Interestingly enough, the Gemara Maseches Avodah Zarah has a different approach. And the Gemara writes, the Gemara says, Vayake Isha Soa Pal Gemayim. So the Gemara makes the observation that the Malbim has. So really, the Malbim got this from the Gemara. So the Gemara points out that it says, Ke'isha, so locates Natua. Why does David HaMelech use the word shasul? Shasul, says we saw from the Malbim already, shasul means something uprooted from one area, replanted somewhere else. Why doesn't it just say Natua, which means planted? Because he says something amazing. Kalalome Torah meirav echad, eino roa siman bracha liolam. Teaches us that whoever goes ahead and learns Torah from only one teacher, ultimately again will not see success in his learning. How so? So first of all, if you look, meaning here's so before we go on, so what the Gemara is saying is like this. Rabbi Yana is saying is like this. Vayake eitz shasul al pal gemayim means be the kind of tree that could uproot itself and go from place to place. So a tree could be uprooted from here, from location A, go to location B. And the metaphor, says Rabbi Yanai, is don't just learn Torah from one person, don't just have one Rebbe, but make sure you go ahead and you learn Torah from multiple people. Now the wording over here is incredibly profound. Rabbi Yanai says that whoever only learns Torah from one person, Eina roa simin bracha li olam, will not see success, will not see blessing in his learning. That blessing in your learning is derived from the ability of hearing different opinions, of seeing different perspectives, of getting different points of view. He tells a story. Amrlu Rav Chisda Rabbana, listen to this. Rav Chisda said to his students, but I want to tell you something. I said, listen to this. Rav Chisda said to his students, I want to tell you guys something, but I'm nervous that when I tell you, you're all going to leave my shir. And so he says, fine, I'll tell you. What's the teaching? Anyone who learns Torah from only one person doesn't see blessing in his learning. Shavkua va'azil kamei de Rava. So what happened? All the students left, and they went to learn Torah by Rava. So Rav Chisda was right. I'm scared to tell you, but I have to tell you the truth. If you only learn from me your whole life, you're going to be missing out. So the students said, okay, and they left. The Gemara qualifies this. The Gemara says, no, it's good to have a primary Rebbe to get or a primary teacher to get foundational ideas. And once you have your foundational ideas straight, then ultimately, again, you could go ahead and go and learn from other people as well. Now the Gemara goes ahead, and if you look to the end, al pal gemayim, the end of number 4, al pal gemayim. So that's vayake ish shasul. So according to the Gemara, the reason David HaMelech uses the wording, it should be like a ish shasul. Shasul we also translate as planted, but natua would be a better word for planted, because shasul means something that was originally planted in one spot and then moved to a different spot. David HaMelech teaching us, the Gemara teaching us, spiritually diversify. Make sure that you learn Torah from different teachers. Make sure you get different points of view, different ideas, different levels of understanding. And the Gemara says, what is the end of the pasuk? Apal gemayim. So be like a tree that is replanted. Apal gemayim. What is the apal gemayim? Once again, why not al peleg gemayim? On a stream, singular. Why streams? So the Gemara says, a person should divide up his life into 3 parts, the span of his life into 3 parts, and learn different things at different times. Shlish b'mikra, he should spend 1/3 of his life learning Chumash. Shlish b'mishnah, 1/3 of his life learning Mishnah. And shlish b'talmud, 1/3 of his life learning Gemara. Says the Gemara, dividing your life into 3s, how exactly do you do that? Mi yada inish kamachai. Does anyone know how long they're going to live? To which Gemara says, you're right, ki amrinan biyomi. We mean split up your day. Or Rashi says split up your week. But split up your day, that every single day you should diversify. Make sure you learn some Chumash, make sure you learn some Mishnah, make sure you learn some Gemara, of course, make sure you learn some Tehillim, that every single day diversify, split up. So what's the theme of this Gemara? The theme of this Gemara is really something incredible, which is Vaya ke'etz shasul. Ultimately, again, be like a tree that ultimately, again, has the ability to move from spot to spot to spot. Don't only learn Torah from one Rebbe. The Gemara says learn from multiple Rebbeim. And don't only learn one thing. Palgimain, streams of water. Make sure that you go out and you learn different things. Chumash, Mishnah, Gemara, obviously those are just representative. And whatever else. But make sure the idea is spiritually diversify. And this is two things. But really what the Gemara is teaching us is something amazing. As Chazal say in Pirkei Avos, Eizehu Chacham Halomed Mikol Adam. This is so incredibly important. Let's speak about this for just a moment, which is the need to learn from other people. So, when we hear this, we often assume that what does it mean to learn from other people? Learning from other people means that people who are smarter than me, people who are wiser than me, like the Gemara is learning from different Rebbeim, different Moros, different teachers. But what Chazal are really trying to express to us is to have a tolerance for other opinions. Listen to other opinions in life, even if you do not share them. Listen to other people's ideas, even if you do not share them. By the way, I just want to point out, it doesn't mean you have to embrace other people's ideas. It doesn't mean you have to accept other people's ideas, but you have to listen. You have to listen. What is the Gemara saying? Don't just learn from one Rebbe. Why not? I don't understand. Torah is Torah is Torah. So what does it matter if I learn my whole life from one Rebbe or from 5 different Rebbeim? Because every Rebbe brings his own view, and brings his own worldview, and brings his own life experiences, and brings his own little, as I say, little kinetz, right? His own little idea that's reflective of where he's coming from, of the life he's led, maybe even of the family he grew up in, different perspectives. Because what makes a person, a whole person, a well-rounded person, is the ability to hear other perspectives. Because when you hear other perspectives, that allows for spiritual diversification. That's the whole idea also of splitting your time. Don't just learn one thing. To me, I love Chumash, I learn Chumash. But there's a whole body of Torah. It's a whole body of Torah. It's like showing up at the smorgasbord, right? Would anyone show up at the smorgasbord and only park themselves by one station? It's like apikarsos, heresy, right? No one does such a thing like that. We'd say, what a tipish, what a fool. There's a whole beautiful smorgasbord over here, right? And you're only staying by one place, so life is a lot like a smorgasbord, right? There are so many beautiful things to learn, so much beautiful Torah, so many incredible Rebbeim, so many incredible teachers, so many incredible role models. Don't limit yourself to one, diversify. But I think on a deeper level, also teaching us the need to hear different opinions. And this is so incredibly important because, again, we certainly see this again in greater society. There's zero tolerance for an opinion that is not, people have no tolerance. And this is even us, even in our community, we've lost an ability to hear other opinions that are not like our own. Again, I want to be clear, sometimes, because I think people sometimes are a little bit too insecure in their own beliefs. And they think that if they listen or entertain a different point of view or a different opinion, somehow my hearing you out is like a tacit acceptance of what you're saying. It's not true. It's not true. The same way, why it is so important to go ahead and engage all kinds of Jews. All kinds of Jews. But they hold views that are different to my own. Okay. Be strong enough in your own hashkafas, and be strong enough in your own observance, and be strong enough in everything that you're doing, and you can have a conversation with anyone and everyone. And if you're secure enough in who and what you are, the fact that someone else is espousing something different than you is not going to take away from your observance and from your commitment one iota. Now, if you're unsure of yourself, then enochinami, maybe you have a little bit of an insecurity. But to hear different opinions, not to accept. I don't have to accept. Don't accept every opinion, because the truth is, most opinions are probably wrong, right? And most things that people say may not be of such relevance or of such wisdom. But you have to be the kind of person who is a shomea. You have to be the kind of person who is able to listen. You have to be the kind of person who is able. How much better would Klal Yisrael be if we were able to actually listen to each other? How much different? And again, and the ability, I will tell you that sometimes when I interact with clergy from other streams of Judaism, I'll often make it abundantly clear that, we're not having a conversation to convince each other, because you are not going to move me from my version of Yiddishkeit And I'm sure I'm not going to move you. And that's okay. I don't need to move you. You don't need to move me. As long as we're clear on that, what can we work on? What can we do? How can we build unity? But so often, again, we are so scared to hear anything else. Because sometimes if I hear it, then it means I'm acknowledging it. It means that it's true. It's not true. We hear stuff all the day. You know, I would venture to say that a good percentage of the stuff you hear on any given day is probably not worth all that much. Hopefully not this year. Hopefully this year is something that's worth hearing. But a lot of stuff you hear, like, whatever, it's just gibberish. It just doesn't mean anything. But it's fine. You learn the art of listening. It goes in one ear, goes out the other. But the power of listening, the power of being a shomea, the power of being able to go ahead and learn from other people, that's how you build bridges. And that's how you build a nation. And that's ultimately, again, how you build a Klal Yisrael. And that's how you build a society. If as Jews we internalize this lesson, how much better Klal Yisrael would be. If Western society, if our country, if the United States of America, if our citizenry, including ourselves, would learn this lesson, how much better off we would be. If leadership would learn this lesson, how much better off we will be. Vaya ke'et shasul al palgei mayim. Ultimately, again, be the kind of person who is able to learn from others, who is able to listen to others, and ultimately, again, who is able to spiritually diversify. Now, obviously, when we speak about spiritual diversification, that is within the framework of acceptable spiritual diversification, right? Remember, again, not Chas V'Shalom suggesting that spiritual diversification means outside of the confines of halacha, of our proper Torah hashkafas. No, within that framework, you have to diversify. But in terms of listening, right? In terms of listening, in terms of being a shemaya, in terms of acknowledging other people, in terms of listening to all opinions, that could ultimately go across a much larger spectrum. Which leads us then to our last source for today. And this is Rav Hirsch. And Rav Hirsch really draws, it's really just a different application of the Gemara and really of the Malbim as well. But Rav Hirsch says something so beautiful. If you're looking at number 6, he also quotes this idea, this nata versus shasal. So he writes, nata is the original planting. Shasal, however, is the transplanting of young shoots into soil best suited for their growth. This is interesting ideas, right? So he says that shasal means to take a shoot, right, a piece of the tree, and to replant it. It appears to be phonetically related to the rabbinic shadal, the expression God. This expression is highly appropriate to the foregoing explanations. Listen to this. He draws nourishment for the development of his mind and character, not from the environment in which he happens to find himself by accident of birth or circumstances, but after serious deliberation, he implants himself at the source, where he can develop so as to assure for himself prosperity and welfare. In English, Rav Hirsch says something amazing. David HaMelech says, a lot of times in life, we are planted in places, right? Think about this, right? The metaphor of the tree is a very powerful one. So the metaphor of the tree, I'm planted in places. I didn't choose the family I was born into. Baruch Hashem, I was exceptionally lucky to have a wonderful mother, to have a wonderful father, to have a wonderful mishpacha, right? But again, you don't choose the family that you're planted in. And a lot of times we're planted in dysfunctional situations. There are a lot of dysfunctional families. You know, no one thinks they're dysfunctional. It's only once kind of you leave that home and then you see, wow, that was really messed up, that you begin to see that things were a little bit off kilter. But you don't choose. Many people are planted in dysfunction. There are people who are planted in abusive homes. A lot of times in life, we're planted in situations. That's your birth. But the truth is, even beyond birth, a lot of times in life, I find myself pushed into situations, not of my choosing. Life circumstances plant me somewhere. And you know what the danger of life is? Too many times in life, people assume that where life planted you is where you must remain. Now, the truth is, you can't change your family. That is true. That where HaKadosh Baruch Hu plants you, that is your family. Now, what your relationship is to them, or how healthy they are for you, that's a different discussion. But Lamais, at the end of the day, you're planted there. But so many other situations in life where life plants me somewhere, I don't have to remain there. You see, we think that when life plants us somewhere, because life planted me here, this is where I am, and this is where I must remain. And says Rav Hirsch, David HaMelech tells us, V'haya ke'et shasul, not eitz natua. Eitz natua is a tree that was planted somewhere by circumstances beyond itself. Kadosh Baruch Hu put the tree here, or the farmer put the tree here. No, V'haya ke'et shasul. In life, your tree is not natua. Your tree is shasul. Shasul means that you have mobility. We never think of mobility when it comes to a tree, because after all, again, a tree is planted. A tree is in the ground. A tree lays down roots. There's no mobility with a tree. Yes, there is. Yes, there is. A tree could be uprooted and replanted somewhere else. Says Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch something absolutely amazing. There is sometimes in life where your tree is planted, what he calls quote unquote by accident of birth or circumstances, which means yes, sometimes things happen beyond my control, like the family I'm born into, or other circumstances of life where my tree is planted somewhere. But now you have to make a choice. Are you going to let your tree remain there? Let your tree remain there, or are you going to have the courage to pull up your roots and replant yourself somewhere else? Isn't this absolutely incredible? You don't have to live your life where you are planted or where you were planted, but you could decide where you want to be planted. You can decide to pull up your roots in any given location and replant yourself somewhere else. That's why David HaMelech uses the word Vaya Ke'etz Shasul. If he wanted to speak about a tree that had permanent roots, Natua. It's planted, it's there. Shasul means this tree started somewhere else, now it's here. Well, if it started somewhere else and now it's here, that means it could be picked up and moved somewhere else. What an incredible metaphor for life. Because so many times in life, we find ourselves in circumstances that we really don't like, that are not good. They're not good. Sometimes it's because things happen to us beyond our control, and therefore, again, circumstances planted my tree here. Sometimes I just made poor decisions or bad life moves, and that's the reason why my tree is here, but it doesn't really make a difference. If your tree is rooted in soil that is not good for you, if your tree is in a location where there's too much sun, there's too much shade, if your tree is in a location where you feel you can't thrive, you can't grow, you are not being nourished, you have the power to pull up your roots and to move your tree somewhere else. That is the koach that each of us has. Now it's true on a physical level, but it's also even more true on an emotional, spiritual level. So much of life is your state of mind. And so much of life is about how you view yourself or how you view your situation. So yes, sometimes in life, physically, I have to move myself into a new situation. I have to. This, what I'm doing now, maybe the life I'm leading, the lifestyle I'm leading, the people I'm surrounding myself with, it's not good for me. It's not the right thing for me. So sometimes in life, I have to literally, physically uproot my tree and move myself somewhere else. But more often than not, it's not a physical relocation that I need. It's an emotional, mental, spiritual, cognitive reorientation that I need. And so sometimes really all I need to do is uproot the inner tree and say, you know what? I'm going to stop looking at these circumstances like this, or I'm going to stop reacting like this, or I'm going to stop behaving like this, or I'm going to stop feeling like the victim of circumstances and instead take the reins of my existence. That's when you choose to replant your tree. And that is the koach David HaMelech says that each of us have. So if you bring this all together, it turns out, and I apologize because it feels like the pace is slowing down even more. At first I just thought we'll just start from Kapitel Aleph. Now we're doing about a half a pasuk, a shir. But again, you begin to see the profundity in all of this. So in one little phrase, Vaya Ke'etz Shasul Apal Geimayim, David HaMelech teaches us so many incredible lessons. Lesson number one, the Radak. And the Radak says, the Eish Shasul Apal Geimayim represents inner tranquility, inner peace. And when will you find inner peace, contentment, and ultimately happiness? Only if you're living a life that's meaningful. A life of meaning, which is a life that is steeped in holiness, a life steeped in Kedusha, a life that is steeped in a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with your fellow Jew, a life that is meaningful in some way because you know that you are making a contribution. That's the Radak. The Malbim explains so beautifully that the tree metaphor teaches us a number of things. First of all, again, man is a tree, but man is an upside down tree. My roots are in Shemaim. This is so incredibly important because so often we think of ourselves as base, as material, as Adama, like Adam, as Adama. But no, my roots are with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. My roots are in Shemaim. And ultimately, again, those roots feed my trunk. My job in life, produce peiros, produce something. And no, you can't rely on your children to be your crown accomplishment in this world. You can't. Your children can be one of your accomplishments, but your crown accomplishments have to be you. have to be you. What kind of personality have you created? What type of life are you leading? How are you contributing? And what are you doing in this world? The Malbim then goes on and he says, from the tree we learn 3 dynamic lessons. Number 1, fruit, create a legacy. Number 2, again, shasul, a tree could be uprooted and put into another location, the power of adapting. We could adapt to anything. The greatest koach that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has ever given us is the power to adapt. Anyone who has ever undergone tragic loss, suffered tragic loss, knows that in the immediate aftermath of tragic loss, a person thinks to themselves, I can't go on. I can't go on. I don't know. I can't live. And then something amazing happens. You live. You live. It's not the same. It's never the same in the aftermath of tragic loss. But I live. Why? Because the Ribbon Shalom programmed us. He built us with the ability to adapt. I can adapt. The same way I know that if it's cold, I have to adapt. I have to put on a coat. So in life, I have the ability to adapt as well, emotionally, cognitively, spiritually. And number 3, said the Malbim, lesson number 3 is nourish your soul with water. Nourish your tree with Torah. Then make sure ultimately, again, the same way, if you give the tree, the wrong nourishments. You give a tree chalent to eat. The tree's not going to do all that much. Chalent is very nourishing. It's nourishing for the neshama, nourishing for the guf. It's incredible. Going to do nothing for a tree. So the personalistic tree has to be nourished by the right things as well. Has to be nourished by the waters of Torah. If you don't give your tree enough water of Torah, the tree will wither. The Gemara teaches us that spiritual diversification. Learn from different people. Be open to different ideas. Be courageous and strong enough in who you are to be able to hear the voices of those who don't agree with you. Don't be limited to one narrow interpretation or one narrow ashkafa, but even within the appropriate framework of halacha, appropriate framework of Yiddishkeit, there are so many different voices, so many different opinions, so many different life outlooks. Be courageous enough to be able to learn from all of them and build relationships across the spectrum. We then saw also, again, spiritual diversification. Don't just be rooted in one form of limud, but have the courage to learn many different things. And finally, Rav Hirsch teaches us that often life plants you in one place. But David HaMelech says, don't be like a planted tree. Be like a tree that is shasul, a transplantable tree. Where you are in life is not where you have to remain. If you know that this is not a good situation physically, emotionally, cognitively, spiritually, find the koach to uproot your tree and move yourself to somewhere better. We'll stop over here for today. Mirz Hashem, all these incredible lessons from the tree. Just one little phrase. Again, continuing, I'll just end off with this, continuing the Ashrei narrative. The goal, lead an Ashrei life. Step 1, avoid the pitfalls. Step 2, engage in positive dynamic activity. Step 3, be like the tree that is plantable, replantable, and all of the lessons that the tree embodies. The next step in ultimately actualizing our Ashrei destiny. We'll stop here. Wishing everyone a wonderful day, and Mirz Hashem, looking forward to continuing tomorrow. Have a great day.